Hey, what's up? Zach here, and today I've got the all-new adidas Cybersonic 2. Small tweaks, huge differences. Let's get into it. Now, the timing on the Cybersonic 2 was pretty lucky this year because I got it right after the Ubersonic 5. It was the next tennis shoe that I had on foot. So I was able to get a really direct comparison between the two of them. And I was actually able to get my father in these for a pretty long time as well. So it was nice to hear what he had to say as well about them, given his, concerns and his wants in a tennis shoe versus the stuff that I look at as well. So with that being said, let's get into the uppers. Now, number one, this is a pretty aggressively gusseted tongue, and the tongue is double thickness. Now, the padding on the outside does have macro channels, but on the inside, it is just, standard foam backing. There really isn't any egress from the tongue. Then you get into the forefoot, and it's kind of the opposite. It has the macro channels on the inside and then the really, tight mesh on the outside. And it's got that added tough rubber coming around the toe box. You look at this thing on the upper durability test, 10 seconds highest grit sandpaper. Basically, the burr just cleans it off. So really, you got outsole rubber coming up to that point. In terms of dragging or sliding, these should be pretty darn good for you. But it's got enough pores in it to where it's malleable enough, right? There wasn't a lot of break and there wasn't a lot of bending and snapping. I'd say for maybe the first, 10, 15 minutes. There was some bending and snapping in this thing, and then after that, super buttery. So that was really nice to see. Look at this thing in the rear foot. Now, this does have an incredibly strong internal heel counter. Now, that is complemented by an external heel counter, right? It's that energy rod that makes that external heel counter, which dives into the midsole of the shoe, which we'll talk about in the midsole teardown. Now, it also has this really kind of high friction section in the bottom of the rear foot to kind of hold your heel into the shoe, kind of interact with the sock. Honestly, on these, I only had very, very mild heel slippage on them, and that was not even after break-in. Now, the lace line of these, mostly outrigger, but it does dive down into the strobe board. You do get two reinforced rubber lace eyelets in the rear foot. You can make a runner's knot out of them. It's kind of tough because they're so far apart. But like I said, heel slippage on them really was not a problem. The heel counter also does come up pretty high on them. So it just uses more of the shape of the shoe to hold you in and just some smoke and mirrors to kind of hold you in the shoe versus having like a ton of bulky padding. It does have a decent amount of padding, but it's nothing like crazy bulky. Now you look at this thing on the breathability test. That's the real miracle of this. 92.9 degrees. That's all these things heated up. And you would think with all the padding in the tongue and in the forefoot, these things would heat up a ton, but there's just enough room for breathability in these things, even with the really strong, aggressive gusset, really nice, plush, comfortable tongue. They still just expel heat and moisture really well. Also on the breathability mapping, you can see where all the fog is getting out of these things. So like I said, you go into the rear foot, midfoot and rear foot of the shoe, it's just woven mesh, but because you have such a strong external heel counter with those energy rods and internal heel counter, plus just the shape of the shoe, how it sits on the ground, we'll talk about that when we talk about the speed section. But just the way the shoe sits on the ground, it's an incredibly fast shoe, but also an incredibly containing shoe for also how breathable the shoe is. But getting into midsole teardown, if you're gonna use Light Strike, I think this is how you should use it. Now, number one, it is dual density in the rear foot. Actually, it felt like it was less dense Light Strike on the bottom and more dense on the top. It's very, very similar. There's not much difference between the two. But the real trick of this shoe is those energy rods that go from the rear foot of the shoe, they cross through the midfoot, and then it sends the leaflet into the forefoot of the shoe. Now, these things are double thickness, hollow on the inside, and they do give a ton of energy return. Just feels so snappy underfoot for honestly how light they really are. I mean, you look at these things in the running space too when they use them, and they're, like I said, for what they are and the profile of them, they just do an outsized job. But once again, look at this thing on the bounce height test, really no shocker for Light Strike, only 29 centimeters in the rear foot, 27 in the forefoot. Light Strike just doesn't, it's just not a super bouncy feeling foam. It's much more of just a bottom light feeling foam. It would have been cool to get maybe some jet boost in here or something. I get it with Light Strike that they're trying to make the shoe lighter and lighter, but at least in these ones, you do get a decent enough slab of it. It actually feels like there is something underneath you, like you're not pummeling into the ground, and shock absorption on these things, much, much better than the Ubersonic. So honestly, if you're gonna use Light Strike, I do like this combination, but from someone that does review pretty much all of Adidas's basketball shoes, would be pretty cool to get some of those premium basketball foams in these. But like I said, for what it is pretty good. All right, but getting into what I think is probably the best part of these is the outsole tread. It is basically like a geometric herringbone pattern. You get some flat herringbone under the medial side, and it gets really wide on the lateral side. And basically, it's just different directions of herringbone going all the way through the shoe. But the fact that you get just enough flat herringbone if you want to slide, but enough really wide spaced out herringbone. If you want to get really gritty, tacky stopping power, it really has pretty much everything you want to do, just depends on kind of where you lay the shoe down. These do have an initial grip of 39 degrees on the grip test ramps. These do grip really, really well. That's just because the combination of the flat herringbone, the spaced out herringbone, a lot of opportunities for grip on these things. The durometer comes in at 19.5, so it's decently hard, but it's not crazy because it's not going to slip out from underneath you, put it that way. All these things on the outsole durability test, 10 seconds highest grit sandpaper. Yeah, I mean, the burr basically just cleans it off. So in terms of durability, they should be just fine. Now look at these things on the speed ratio. They only come in at a 1.89. Shank score of 0.4, though, very well earned, brings it up to a 2.29. And I think that kind of criminally undermines the speed of these. No, Light Strike is not super lively. It's not super poppy. It's not super bouncy. But the energy rod is, right? The overall profile of the shoe is, the huge lateral flange you get, the stopping power on these things is phenomenal. So, no, they're not the lightest things on planet Earth, but they're light enough, the profile is sleek enough, and you do get enough back from the energy rods that they do feel like an incredibly quick shoe. They feel like, put it this way, if you can bring the speed to them, then they feel really good, and they're nimble enough and they get out of your way enough, and they feel more flat to the ground but not clunky enough that you can really bring the speed to them. My dad had 3 shoes on that day. He had these ones and a couple others I can't talk about yet. But he said putting these on, he said it was really an eye-opener kind of, because a lot of times he doesn't, review all the shoes I do. A lot of times he just sticks with his shoe. But on these couple days, he was reviewing the shoes I was just for fun. And it kind of was interesting to see the light bulb go off in his head of how speedy and how nimble and quick these ones were versus some of the others that we had been testing. But getting into the fit of the Cybersonics, another pleasant surprise. They only have a 10-degree in-flare, which for a really speed-focused shoe, honestly, to me, isn't terrible. They do come in a hair short at 28.6 centimeters of length. They do have 9.7 centimeters of metatarsal width, 10.7 centimeters of toe box width, and then a toe box taper of 26 degrees, so a few degrees more mellow than most other speed-focused shoes. Like I said, they put you pretty flat to the ground without feeling like you're pummeling through the ground, which I think was a really, really fine needle to thread, and they did it really, really well. I'd say for a narrow and medium foot, you can go true to size. I would say narrow feet could go down a half size on them to get weight reduction, but they're already a hair short, so I'd say narrow and medium, just go true to size. A 2E, I'd go true to size. A 4E, I'd go up 1/2 size. If you're a 2E and want to go up a half size, because they're a little short, they can go up a half size, but if you want to get the weight reduction, more performance fit, more glove-like fit, I went true to size and I was just fine. But like I said, 2E and 4E, you're welcome to go up that half size, or a 4E if you want to go up 1 full size just to get a pretty roomy fit. I think you're okay with it just because they are just a hair short. Now, in terms of the snake bitten foot, in terms of a Light Strike shoe, I think they're pretty decent, and you can get a low profile orthotic in them, so that really helps. I personally had no problems with shock absorption. My father, who was just recovering from neck surgery, had no problems with shock absorption. They do just enough. The energy rod does just enough. It comes just far enough into the shoe to kind of offload that forefoot to give enough kind of buoyancy to the Light Strike. There's enough Light Strike in there, right? Because Light Strike, when you have it in enough quantity and it's the right formulation of it, right? When they use the certain formulation of Light Strike, it is pretty shock absorbing. So I would say for most things, they're actually pretty good, especially in terms of a more speed focused, more aggressive shoe. So yeah, pleasantly surprised with, I think, how many people can find, a decent amount of protection in these for the profile. But in terms of the almighty playability, honestly, it's like everything I want the Ubersonic to be, really. I mean, I really feel like they could probably combine the 2 lines because the Cybersonic is so good. It plays so well. It is so side-to-side stable while being front-to-back speedy. Right? It's side to side fast without feeling like you're gonna roll the shoe over or like it's gonna be too clunky, right? In terms of serving and volleying, like you're at the net before you know it, right? You can feel those energy rods when you're serving over and over and over again. And for serving over and over again, it's fantastic. They feel bottom light, but bottom stable. And they don't feel like you're pummeling through the ground. And you look at them from the first Cybersonic, and they don't look all that different. but the shape of them, just, you know, they put a little more here and there. I mean, just enough. And I think I may have said it in the review previously. I'm not sure. Let's go back and watch it. But I remember saying like, with some small tweaks, this could be like a really, really elite shoe. And now it is. I mean, this is for sure the best Adidas shoe in the lineup. And it is just kind of an all-around good shoe. Really, no matter what you're doing in them, they're really good. And really, no matter what kind of player you are, they do really, really well. I know my dad likes a shoe, and he always asks, are you gonna cut this one? Or like, you know, can I have it? So I know he genuinely liked it. And it's really interesting with Adidas right now because it's the Soul Match Control 2 and the Cybersonic that are like the crazy elite shoes in the lineup. And you would think it'd be the Ubersonic and the Barricade, which would be, at least for me, I would at least think those would be the ones that I would gravitate toward. But with how good the Soul Match Control 2 is, I'll leave that linked in the description at the end of the video too if you want to check that review out. But like, that shoe came out of nowhere. It was phenomenal. The Cybersonic 2 comes out of nowhere, and it's out of this world. Then you got the Ubersonic and the Barricade, which, yeah, I mean, they're okay. I'm really excited to see what they do with the next Barricade. But it's just weird how these two shoes just come out of nowhere for Adidas. So here it is. I mean, they can make a phenomenal shoe. And I hope the Cybersonic 2 is kind of like, you know, the alarm sounding off of what's going to come down the pipeline for Adidas. Because if it's more like this, it's going to be awesome. So I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments down below. And like I said, if you want to see what I'm talking about with the older sibling to the Cybersonic 2, the Soul Match Control 2, make sure you click into this video up above. And if you want to see the younger sibling to the Cybersonic 2, the Ubersonic 5 going into the knife, make sure you click into this video up above. And of course, subscribe down below. Respect, Trevor, and foam. I'll see you somewhere in the Sneakerverse.